Welcome to today's presentation. Before we begin, I'm Lori Nelson. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law. I'm pleased that you're able to join us today. First of all, pursuant to Utah Supreme Court rules regarding CLE, you have to stay on for the entire hour in order to get credit. If for some reason you sign on using one ID and then get bumped off and sign in using another one, please email me at lori.nelson@law.utah.edu so that I can make sure you get credit. Also, if for some reason the registration didn't allow you to put your bar number in, please email me with your bar number. Don't email me if you did put your bar number in, but if you didn't, please email me so I can get your bar number. Also, do not use the chat feature, please. Use the Q&A feature, and we will answer questions. You can like questions. The questions that get the most likes will rise to the top, and we can make sure those questions get answered as we move through this session. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Jay Wilgus, who's one of our alumni. He's from Klancy Street, and he's going to speak to us today about a pretty pertinent topic, I think. So, Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you so much for hosting this and making this space available to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, especially on this particular week. So I may be one of the, a small handful in the room here or elsewhere that are paying attention. But yesterday was National Conflict Resolution Day. It was established in 2005 by the Association for Conflict Resolution and is intended to highlight and give us an opportunity to celebrate peaceful and collaborative methods of dispute resolution. And so today's event is quite timely. I'm also mindful as I say that we are very privileged to be here in the safety and security of where we're joining from, and that conflict around the world is upending folks' lives in a way that makes engaging an event like this in dreamland. And so I take our responsibility here seriously, and am thrilled to be talking about dialogue across difference in an era of intense political polarization. And as we do that, I have a lot on my mind and a lot to share in this time together, and hope that we have some time at the end for some questions as well. I know that there's immense wisdom in the room. I see it looks like we've got 48 attendees or so, with perhaps more on the way, and want to recognize that all of you have something to contribute to our conversation and this really important work of not only preserving our democracy, but allowing it to operate more effectively. I also want to note that I suspect there's great diversity in the room in terms of range of political opinions and perspectives, range of ages, religious affiliations, races, ethnicities, and more. We are here together, I assume, because we care about this topic, and we're a bit tired of the status quo. That's why I'm here and contributing my time to do what I can to make a difference in this environment. And so we're going to spend our time in sort of three primary chunks, sort of where are we and how do we get here? And I'm going to ask for some input from you on that. And then what can we do as lawyers, members of the legal profession, to help address this particularly sticky moment? And I want to share some resources and opportunities with you in that regard. As we get started, though, I want to just share a little bit more about me and my journey on this path. And it began at the University of Utah in 20 some odd years ago, when someone who I did not know at the time, who I called out of the blue, said to me, "Jay, we are not friends, we are enemies at war." That took me by immediate surprise, because I did not know this person. And she did not know me, but she perceived me to be part of a group that she was not interested in or willing to talk with. I was surprised because I was a good kid with great grades who was doing my best to make a positive difference in people's lives. My sin was that I was not part of, I was part of a group that she despised. And so after that initial interaction, we had the fortunate opportunity to co-construct a different relationship and invite others into the process. That experience many, many years ago taught me that peace is not a matter of possibility. It really is a matter of willingness. Are we willing to set aside our differences? Are we willing to take the time we need to take to construct different relationships, to stop repeating the cycles that keep us in this particular moment in time of conflict? So I've been fascinated with conflict ever since, and have spent considerable time in law school at the University of Utah, my master's degree in dispute resolution from the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine University, and then working in the field of conflict resolution on college campuses as director of the Office of Student Conflict Resolution at the University of Michigan, and now in private practice, focusing on helping parties find common ground. So it's with that background that you might suspect that I have, like you, been perplexed and troubled by our current state of affairs, with this immense tension and push and pull between right and left, red and blue. Been troubled by folks shouting at each other. And there are any number of examples of really horrendous behavior, whether it's in coffee shops or subways or on airline flights or in courtrooms or in legislative office buildings, of people behaving in a way that is not conducive to the functioning of relationships, much less our organizations and democracy. I love this image of civil discourse on a stretcher, because it feels so often like that's where we are, and that there is little to do in that process. And it feels that way because we share this common experience with others, where we tend to think that our political views are correct. This quote by David Blankenhorn, who is one of the founders of Braver Angels that we'll talk about later: this warm glow of being certain that my political views are correct, the thrill of perfectly formulated gotcha question, the combined feelings of fury and astonishment that make my political adversaries could be so stupid, so evil, so misguided. Welcome to our era. We live in the age of arrogance and unforgiving, intolerant, anger-stoked age of entrenched confirmation bias across groups, and of constantly alleged binary political choices in which your position is entirely wrong and mine is entirely right. We know as attorneys that that is so often not the case, and that we operate on a spectrum in so many ways. Yet here we are. And so there are many ways to break out of it that we will talk about in a little bit. But our experience with civility in America is shared by not only those of us in the bar and practicing in this way, but Americans around the country. I want to point to a couple representative examples here. A study conducted in 2019 by Weber Shandwick that said that 93% of Americans identified incivility as a problem. 54% of them expected that the general tone and level of civility in the country would decline even further in the next few years. As it turns out, they were right. The American Bar Association just released a report earlier this year, ABA survey of civic literacy, that said 85% of Americans believe that civility has indeed gotten worse compared to the last 10 years. So what are the consequences of this? They're significant in various ways. This incivility that we experience, that we see, that happens all around us in our personal and professional lives, has consequences, leading to violent behavior, bullying, harassment, intolerance, people feeling less safe, less community engagement, folks feeling less trustful in institutions that we need them to participate in, and then feelings of isolation and loneliness. It also has the effect of increasing animosity toward the other political party. Over time, you can see that folks, Republicans agreeing with the statement that Democrats are very unfavorable has increased significantly from 94 to 2016, and the same is true with Democrats. There's less acceptance of political diversity, even in marriages, by parents. So in the course of time where we've become far more accepting of interracial marriage, we have become much less accepting of inter-party marriage. And it's a strange spot that we live in. And we have something to do about it. The other consequence of this is much more significant stress in America. So I appreciate these statistics by the American Psychological Association that 95% of us follow the news regularly, 82% say they check the news at least once a day, and 56% of us saying that staying informed causes us stress. I know that's true for me. I suspect it's true for some of you as well. That stress has a profound impact on our life, but important, I think, to note is that the future of our nation, the current political environment, are identified as common sources of stress in our lives today. And 59% of folks identifying this as the lowest point in our nation's history. So how exactly did we get here? I have some thoughts about that, but want to welcome some input from those of you in the room. So in just a minute, I'm going to share a screen that will invite you to capture a QR code or input a website address and code into your device, and you can provide your input online. But before I switch to that, I just want us to think globally about this decline in civility over the last 30 or so years, because it's been marked during that time period. And during that time period, a lot has changed. What has not changed during that time is sort of fundamental human nature, and who we are and the way that conflict sort of causes us to react. Our political parties have not fundamentally changed during that time. And I mean, our two-party system, we may think that our parties internally have changed, or our relationship between the parties has changed, but we still have the same parties. So what has changed in that time that has contributed to this particular moment? And so you should see on your screen here a question that I'm posing to you. What do you see as the primary contributors to today's politically polarized environment, other than individuals with whom you disagree? If you use this code, you go to menti.com and enter that code, you should be able to input your responses. And if it's helpful, I'll share this QR code that you can grab there as well. And as you enter your responses, we should see those start to populate here. And I'd love to just get your input on this before I share some additional thoughts from other data points that we can consider. So go ahead and enter your input, and let's see what you have. I'm hoping some of you will play along, at least, as we engage with this. There we go. Talk radio, weaponization of religion, fall of white supremacy. What else? What else do you see as the primary contributors to today's environment? Social media, great. It should let you input up to 3. So if you're feeling particularly, adept at this, go ahead and enter a few. Name calling in politics, length in office, gerrymandering, 24-hour news cycle, COVID. Yeah. See, social media, they're getting a little bit bigger, which means that more than one folks are entering that media bias, education, demonization. Yeah. So I'll give you just another couple seconds to input, and then I want to show you the results of a couple different studies that have existed out that we might consider as additional data points. Separation clause links in office. So thank you so much for putting these in. I will say, as I flip forward here, that these results align fairly well with the results that have been conducted with our population at large. So I'll flip to the next screen, and you can see that in 2019, when Weber Shandwick conducted the study on civility in America, social media was right up there at the top. One thing I think is important to note here is that this particular study had been conducted for 10 years, or that was the 9th year that it was done. They didn't introduce social media as a factor to be input in the report until 2012, and in that time it over doubled in its response rate. So you see media, politicians, news media, a lot of factors contributing as reported by respondents to that particular survey in 2019. The American Bar Association just completed a similar survey that they released and had somewhat similar results. So 29% of respondents saying social media and media, public officials were contributing factors to our current state of affairs. So again, this aligns fairly well with what you saw there, with the addition of other options that if we were in person, we could talk much more about, which I would enjoy thoroughly. So there's a number of pieces, and I want to share just a couple additional data points from my perspective, and then a quick video. I love this book by Hector MacDonald on truth. Mary Corporon, a great attorney there in Salt Lake City, once said that my grandma always told me you can never fry a pancake so thin it doesn't have two sides. And that is certainly true with our perspectives on truth and the way that it can be and often is manipulated. We often, in the process of listening to that truth, fail to remember that many of us have righteous minds, and that it can be true that we are good people divided by politics and religion. And I find Jonathan Haidt's work in this area to be useful, although not dispositive, of course, reminding us that we have different moral sense receptors that exist across the globe. And then recognizing, of course, that the way we engage in conflict, the confirmation bias that we experience, is true for all of us, as is the reactive devaluation of how we respond when we're in conflict with someone. So I have a quick video I'd like to share also that I think is useful in articulating some of our where we lie. It's not perfect. I don't love all the descriptors or imagery, but hope you will appreciate it as a contribution to our conversation. And Lori, I saw you pop on. Can I do something?
Before we jump into the video, there's a question about to what extent overpopulation exceeding Earth's carrying capacity contribute to incivility. Do you have any?
That's a great question, Virginia, and I think it's certainly an interesting one as we think about having less space, needing to be in closer proximity to people, a greater number of people to govern under a greater number of governance structures, and governance structures that rely on imperfect people, fallible humans and processes. And I think as folks talk about our United States as a great experiment, I think it remains true that we are learning how to do this. And we cannot take this experiment, our unique experiment here, for granted. I think it's a worthwhile contribution and a good point to make, that we encounter this when we have to find ways to govern ourselves and behave in a way that allows us to live in the same space. So thank you. So here's a video on that front that I hope you can hear.
If you've spent any time on Earth, you might have noticed that humans are not the most rational of creatures. We make decisions based mostly on emotions instead of facts, and a lot of times we're guided by tribal instinct. Part of the problem is that the human brain evolved to help us survive, and not necessarily to help us be factually accurate. So we often respond better to social and tribal dynamics than to intellectual analysis. For example, if someone's tribe believes that Obama is a secret Muslim born in Kenya, that person probably thinks the hard proof of his US birth certificate is fake. That conclusion is neither rational nor accurate. But from a tribal perspective, it makes sense. It's safer to agree with your tribe and stay united ideologically, even if you're wrong about the facts, than to disagree and isolate yourself. Another part of the problem is that our brain is constantly protecting our worldview and sense of identity. So when our worldview is challenged, that same part of the brain that processes physical danger gets activated. This is why people sometimes react so aggressively to information that proves them wrong. And this is why it's often so hard to have an intelligent political debate. Several studies have also shown that there is a backfire effect that happens when people encounter facts that contradict their current beliefs. They actually become more convinced of their original ideas. So fighting ignorance with facts is like fighting a grease fire with water. It seems like it should work, but it actually just makes the whole thing worse. Lastly, there's the problem of lack of empathy. Several studies have found that when humans are divided into groups of any kind, we instinctively become less empathetic to members of other groups. That means that for survival's sake, we might instinctively empathize less with other races, other nationalities, and even other sports teams. This instinctive dehumanization of other groups is what makes things like slavery and genocide possible in our society. So, what can you do? If you want someone to consider factual information that clashes with their beliefs, first you have to prevent their brain from seeing you as a personal threat. So, look for ways to identify the person as part of your tribe and you as part of theirs. Hey, we're part of the same family. Hey, we're both parents. Hey, we both still play Pokemon Go. Whatever. Anything that communicates that you're part of the same tribe. That's the first step. Second, consider the possibility that you may be wrong. Maybe the facts are not on your side, in which case admitting it will help you model to the other person that it's okay to be wrong. I understand that none of this is easy or smooth, but if we want to continue to function as a stable society, we have to learn to get past our own natural biases. Only when that happens, we will be able to move forward towards a better future. Peace.
So, I appreciate that contribution as a reminder about where to start when we have these conversations. And it reminds me specifically of a negotiation professor I had many years ago, I guess 2001 or 2001 probably, at Pepperdine, who said the first rule of negotiation is to sip tea. What he meant by that was we need not begin difficult conversations or negotiations without first having a relationship and demonstrating interest in and curiosity about other people. It does us no good in those situations to demonize others who we hope to persuade or engage in a problem-solving process with.
If you've spent any time on Earth.
So what that brings us to our audience today in our profession, a profession that I treasure and expect many of you, all of you do as well. So what role can we play? What is our responsibility here? As I think about that question, I know how I think about it for my own work, but I find inspiration and support in contributions from others, including the American Bar Association, which has done some good work in this area recently in an initiative to promote greater civility. They have a quote on their website that says, if we face a country divided over any issues. The ABA encourages the legal profession to lead the way in promoting civics, civility, and collaboration, the cornerstones of our democracy, which is the name of their initiative, Cornerstones of Democracy Initiative, to restore confidence in our democratic institutions and the judicial system and protect the rule of law. One step back from that, though, it speaks toward a greater sense of responsibility I have, and it's what inspires me to be a lawyer every day in the way that I am, is this notion articulated by former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Warren Burger, that said the obligation of our profession is, or has long been thought to be, to serve as healers of human conflict. So I was a bit of an odd duck in law school, in that I never had an interest in serving in a traditional legal capacity, working as a litigator or otherwise. I went to law school because I was interested in being a mediator and thought that being an attorney would help me understand the legal issues at play in settlement negotiations or otherwise. But I find myself hearkening back to this quote very often and think about the way in which our structures for the legal profession were developed and are still intended to resolve disputes between us, to address harmful behavior that has occurred. And am troubled by ways in which our current processes don't allow that. And so today's session is not about ADR and alternative dispute resolution processes and other options there, but they serve as useful reminders that the way we do this work matters. I am proud that our Bar Association, our Supreme Court in Utah, has adopted standards of professionalism and civility, and am inspired, frankly, when I read the preamble, which says that we as lawyers our conduct should be characterized at all times by personal courtesy and professional integrity. We must be mindful of our obligations to the administration of justice, which is a truth-seeking process to resolve human and societal problems in a rational, peaceful, and efficient manner. I know as lawyers, we're not often looked to as the standard bearers for civility, for the peaceful resolution of conflict, but we can be. It is the pursuit of that which inspires me to do the work that I do, and which I hope calls you to this session and invites you to do whatever you can to contribute in that way. So the rules laid out here are big and broad, inviting us to do this without reflecting any ill will, to refrain from utilizing hostile, demeaning, or humiliating words in written and oral communications with those we're working with, and to adhere at all times to express promises and agreements. These standards are important, and I think it's important that we reflect on them as attorneys, not only for purposes of our work, but more broadly for the important work we do for the broader culture and our broader society, recognizing that we have any number of responsibilities as a lawyer, as attorneys, but one of them is to serve as models for how this work can get done. As we think about models for how this work gets done, it's really important to know that we don't have to do this in isolation, that there are a great number of resources there that we can turn to. And those resources come from all over our great big country. This quick snapshot shows you some representation of organizations or initiatives dedicated to dialogue across difference nationally. I can't possibly spend all the time we might want addressing all of those, but do want to highlight a couple that I think are really useful and important, and that I have the most experience with. One of them is the National Institute for Civil Discourse out of the University of Arizona. And the second is an organization called Braver Angels, which was formerly called Better Angels in honor of a quote from Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War that called upon Americans to rely on the better angels of our nature. They changed their name strangely in what I understand to be a sort of a trademark dispute with the name Better Angels, and they're now Braver Angels, with the idea that these conversations are difficult and it takes courage to engage productively across our differences and to even enter these conversations in the first place. So I want to share a few resources with you in that regard. First, from the National Institute for Civil Discourse. And in sharing these, I don't want to minimize the great number of other resources that exist out there. I just want to draw your attention to several that I found particularly helpful. And I see these questions popping in too, Lori, and maybe I can pause for just a second to glance at them in case they're present a good opportunity now. So Virginia, 2 days ago, you found How I Become a Killer Negotiator in 9 Steps. Share with a friend. Oh, great. Just a helpful suggestion there. And then Stephanie, how do you think the ever-aging population, including extremely aged group of persons in government, contributes to conflicting viewpoints? Stephanie, I love that question, and I'm going to share a very specific example with you at the end here from some recent work I did with the New Hampshire state legislature, 12 Republicans and 12 Democrats. And in the process, found myself struck by the structural exclusion of younger voices. And by that, I mean the amount of time it takes to serve well for virtually $0 at the New Hampshire State House and many other places makes it a endeavor that almost requires you to be independently wealthy or retired, and therefore excludes many of the voices we might want to have involved in serving in our legislature. And so, yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could get you and others serving, because that would make a difference. And to do so, we need to make it realistic financially and otherwise to have that be possible. So I'd love these questions and resources. Please keep them coming, particularly the resources, because I'm sharing just a couple. And I know there's, as I said, there's great wisdom in the room and resources available. And so it's okay with Lori. I'm okay with having resources dropped into the Q&A, and we can just be able to, people can see them along the way. So the NICD, National Institute for Civil Discourse, has a number of initiatives that I appreciate. One of which is called, that was developed in 2020, called Golden Rule 2020, and is now a bit dated just in terms of timeline, but not one bit dated in terms of content, because so much of those rules we just looked at in the preamble and laid out by the Utah Supreme Court can be distilled down to the Golden Rule, and inviting us to treat others the same way we would wish to be treated, which is with respect and dignity, and be given an opportunity to be heard. NICD also has a great program called Common Sense American that goes a step further from these interpersonal conversations and invites us to engage in problem solving with folks who think differently than us, and then develop those in a sort of closed door environment that allows that to populate and be offered to legislators in states where these matters can make a difference legislatively. I want to pay attention, though, in the next few minutes to their initiative called Engaging Differences, as we think about the interpersonal strategies, personal and interpersonal strategies needed to engage in dialogue difference in this area of polarization. And the initiative that I'm going to draw your attention to was developed a number of years ago, but they refer to it as their 7-day civility challenge. And I like this as a way of summarizing what it takes to do this work well, starting with ourselves and what we pay attention to. The first aspect of this is that we have to make a personal commitment to civility. That, we can't just be something that we said yes to when we were sworn in, or when we're reminded to look back at the preamble or the rules of professionalism and civility. We have to practice it every day. And I love this quote by James Baldwin. It says, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist," right? We can disagree without being disagreeable, but we have to acknowledge others' right to exist and their humanity. We also have to identify and acknowledge, you don't have to, but it's helpful. And I'm going to do that at the end here. Identify, acknowledge someone who has inspired you to show respect for others, someone who has modeled the way. As Martin Luther King said, peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. And so who are your mentors? Who do you look up to in this regard that helps show you the way across differences? As a third step, we have to make a plan for how we will respond the next time we hear or see someone making uncivil remarks. It's not helpful to utilize the only tools at our disposal and keep repeating things that haven't worked in the past. It is tempting, indeed, if the only tool we have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. So we have to expand the tools in our toolbox. We have to expand the options that exist out there and utilize other tools. ICD offers a whole tool in that regard about how to foster civility on social media, which we know to be a problem, and how to manage stressful and difficult conversations. We don't have time to sort of talk through all those, but it is important to plan ahead, to slow down, and to create the space so it's most likely to be successful, rather than trying to persuade someone through a exchange on social media, which is just not going to work. As we think about that too, it's important to seek diverse viewpoints and listen to learn. I said this before, but you can never fry a pancake so thin it doesn't have two sides. And those sides are represented in different places, which we may not be exposed to. As it turns out, next week is Media Literacy Week, starting in just under 3 days and 18 hours, probably closer to 17 now. But it invites us to think more broadly about how we do this. NICD and Braver Angels have both sponsored events over the years called inviting folks to walk a mile in my news and be exposed to news cycles outside of what you normally see and listen to. Not because you need to agree with them, but because it does make a difference what we're listening to, and to recognize that those sources exist across a spectrum that we can be mindful of. With that spectrum in mind, I appreciate this contribution from an organization called All Sides, which seeks to take all the day's news and distill it into left, right, and center perspectives. So you can see the same story from left, right, and center perspectives. It's a useful tool if you're not, if you are in your own media bubble, to step outside a little bit further and explore what else is out there. We also have to practice making connections and actively listening and find opportunities to do that. And I'm going to share how Braver Angels can help in that way, both in Utah and beyond. But to seek first to understand and then be understood every year for the last few years, many of those organizations I shared with you before have sponsored something called the National Week of Conversation, which is intended to produce meaningful conversations across our political differences across the country at mass scale. The date has not yet been set for 2024, but I invite you to tune in and keep an eye out for it. We also have to prepare for these conversations to do them well. It is nerve-wracking, and we can't just expect that they will happen at the exact right time. If there's a relationship we want to preserve or improve, we can sit well and plan for that. And there are some other resources I'll point to in a minute. And then we actually have to make a decision and identify someone that we want to have a conversation with, and to be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. As we do that, there are tools out there, right? I like these tips to avoid a food fight, establishing comfortable space, clearly showing your intentions, establishing agreements about what we're going to talk about, and making this happen in a way that is most likely to be productive. My experience facilitating a lot of conversations across political differences is that folks seek to move too quickly to talk about the topic, the issue that's on their mind, and they spend no time sipping tea or establishing a relationship. And my experience is that almost guarantees that we're not likely to, the conversation's not likely to be as productive as we would like. So I've got something I want to share with you, but I want to pause for just a second, and I want to see, there's a couple other YouTube videos being put in by Peter. Thank you so much. As I'm looking at those, Lori, are those shared? Those aren't captured anywhere. So I think if you want those, you need to grab them now, correct?
Well, actually, I am capturing them, and I'll put everything in the document and email it to all of the attendees.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and then Christopher, I appreciate this. That our negotiated dispute resolution and our broader justice system depends on this commitment to a concept that objective reality does exist, and it's possible to arrive at the truth through analysis of credible evidence. Yes, and our processes, this is what's beautiful about it, are intended to utilize those fact-finding processes when necessary to drill down to that truth, and to identify that as clearly and as objectively as possible. And we know that those systems can sometimes get the answers wrong, and we have to be willing, as that prior video showed, to admit when they're wrong, when we've gotten the wrong answer, as a way of instilling faith in those we care about, with whom we might want to engage. So I have a video to show in that regard. It doesn't represent, of course, the totality of perspectives that exist across the country. It certainly doesn't represent the totality of religious, racial identities that exist, but I think serves as a useful reminder about what's possible when we speak bravely across difference.
Well, a friend of mine passed away, and she was all about reconciliation, always about reaching out to people, and to unlikely people. When she passed away, I wanted to do something to honor her. And I thought, who would be the most unlikely person on the planet that I would reach out to? And it was Bob.
I'm the president and CEO of the Family Leader. And our mission statement is to strengthen families by inspiring Christ-like leadership in the home, the church, and government.
I'm the executive director at One Iowa, which is the state's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organization. I've been an activist and an advocate and sometimes an agitator in this movement for almost 30 years.
Well, Donna and I, we see the world very differently. In our view on marriage, on sexuality, and probably on a lot of other issues.
I guess you'd have to say that my impression of Bob was not only he was the opposition, he was the enemy.
I've probably made statements about her and her organization in the press. She's probably made statements about me and my organization in the press. we weren't natural allies. We weren't natural coffee buddies. And so she emailed the family leader and said, hey, I talked to Bob, and Bob said he'd be willing to do coffee. Let me know a good time and date. And so they shared that email with me like, is this true? I mean, is this real? And I said, yeah, it's real, but I never thought she'd follow up on it.
I never thought that he would respond.
And so we set a date to have coffee.
And that was the beginning of this amazing journey. I remember walking in, just being very nervous. I had no idea what to expect, none at all.
Well, you know, the skeptic in me thought she would have an agenda, and she probably thought I might have an agenda. But as soon as we sat down, I thought, she doesn't have an agenda. She just wants to get to know who I am. And that really compelled me to say, I should want to get to know who she is.
I think when people have the courage to show you who they are, something happens. And so what surprised me about Bob was his humanity. He's an incredible dad. I also found him to be really funny, and I didn't expect that at all. But we laugh a lot.
Donna's a very good person. She's a passionate person. She has advocated for her issues tirelessly for over 3 decades. So regardless if I agree or disagree with her on the issues, I have a tremendous respect for her.
For a long time, I've been really tired of the hate and the aggression and the kind of snarkiness. We can disagree without being disagreeable. We can fight the good fight in the court of public opinion, but we don't have to hurt each other. That's, I think, the big takeaway for me. We don't have to hurt each other, because when we do that, we're hurting ourselves. We get coffee about once every couple of months.
And I think with Donna, her and I readily assessed that we have a lot of common interest. We have some common ground. The only regret in all of that is that I wasn't the one to ask her out for coffee. And she's the one who asked me out. And I'm glad she did, but I kind of feel like I should have.
What surprised me was not that he liked me. I thought, yeah, he'd like me. What surprised me was I really liked him.
It hasn't changed my beliefs. It may have changed my approach, because when we do put out a press release, when we do make a public statement, many times I think, I wonder how Donna will view this.
Here's the deal. If Bob and I can have coffee, if we can tell stories and laugh and get to know each other, if we can like each other, then I think almost anyone can find that person in their life, and maybe they can reach out their hand and invite them in.
So it can't always be as kumbaya-ish as Donna and Bob. Donna and Bob, although they have different gender identities, different sexual orientations, different religious affiliations, they notably do share the same apparent racial identity. Both occupy positions of power and privilege in their respective organizations. And so they had some ability to find themselves on the same team to begin with, which is not true in all of the conversations or relationships we need to engage in. But I hope it serves as an example of what's possible when we reach out our hand to speak across those differences and invite folks into conversation. I also hope it, Christopher, to your question, I think reminds me that it really is critical to establish relationships before we go about trying to figure out what is fact and what is fiction. Because when we have those relationships, we can do something that is critical in that realm, which is to identify objective criteria we will utilize to weigh what is perceived as fact and which facts we use moving forward, including experts for whom we might want to, or with whom we might want to rely on in that process. One thing I think is easy for us to we have the ability to lean on rules of evidence and structured systems for this in the courtroom. We do not have those same rules applying in our personal and professional relationships elsewhere, and we can't expect everyone to understand and rely on those same standards. And so it can be necessary, although exhausting, to reestablish those standards in our unique environments. And one way that we can do that is by having more and more of these conversations. So thank you, Chris, for pointing that out, and the contribution, and Virginia for sharing your resource that you've put in the chat too. But another way we can practice here is by finding folks who want to engage in these conversations with us. And I appreciate Braver Angels in this way, because it seeks from a very local sort of city-based standpoint to statewide, to regional, to a national scale, to generate thousands and thousands of these conversations and to build relationships. So Braver Angels has a number of programs that are educational in nature, about skill building, skills training, and others that are engagement focused, workshops, one-on-one conversations, red-blue workshops, and otherwise. One thing I want to point out is this debates here. David Blankenhorn has a great who's the founder of Braver Angels, has a great piece called My Debate with Dialogue. I like the word dialogue. I'm trained in conflict resolution, but it's important to note that it is a loaded word politically. And not all folks find an invitation to dialogue to be what they want to engage in, and instead are more intrigued by the collision of ideas in a debate format. And so I'm reminded that in our calls to civility, we must bring that to dialogue and to debate, recognizing that both are useful in advancing the way. The core values of Braver Angels is to speak with our fellow citizens with respect for their intelligence and goodwill, to avoid characterizing as deserving of disdain or pity. Humility, we'll talk about our own side with the knowledge that our leaders and we are not perfect, and that our current policy solutions are not complete answers to our nation's complex problems. We will allow people to feel what they are feeling and not ask them to hide their satisfaction or grief. We will emphasize that it's up to all of us to depolarize politics and meet our challenges. So I had an opportunity recently to facilitate what we call a red-blue workshop with a group of red and blue colleagues that you see on the left there at the New Hampshire state legislature, involving 12 Republican and 12 Democratic legislators that are pictured in the image on the bottom. And can tell you it was one of the greatest privileges of the last year to be able to do that. And folks walked away from that room with absolutely zero commitments to agree on policy-based issues, but a much greater enthusiasm to get to know each other and work across the aisle to bridge those differences when they can. And the greatest takeaway that I got from that experience was that they're just given no opportunities to do that, and that the opportunities for relationship building are few and far between. And this group is committed to doing that work moving forward. So I spend just a couple minutes in closing with the idea that recognizing that this work is possible, that it's happening at the local level, within our state legislators, and that we are capable of doing this. And with that thought that we are capable, I love these two quotes from two presidents that I don't necessarily agree or support everything that they said or did, but I do appreciate these propositions. Bill Clinton said, "There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America." George Bush, in the final analysis, "We are not partisan combatants. We are human beings, equally vulnerable, equally wonderful in the sight of God. We rise or fall together, and we are determined to rise." We can't solve this together. We can't solve it alone, but we can each do, as Desmond Tutu suggested, our little bit of good where we are, because it is those little bits of good that put together do, in fact, overwhelm the world. And my hope for us is the same offered by Abraham Lincoln many years ago, that not only my children, but their kids to 1,000 generations continue to enjoy the benefits conferred upon us by a united country. This is difficult work. I don't mean for this time together, for anything I've said to suggest that it is anything other than that. I do mean to dwell in what's possible if we're willing to engage in these conversations, to have difficult conversations, to put down our egos and find our common ground. And as I close there, I just want to reflect back on the person I mentioned at the beginning, who I learned recently is no longer with us, Nancy Huntsman, who once called me an enemy and who I now appreciate as a friend and colleague, passed away last year of cancer. And I am saddened by that and wish she could be here to engage in this journey with us. And having said all of that, I will wrap up, Lori, and we can take any last questions that we have or turn it to you for what remains.
Thank you
and
very
I would
much.
welcome you all in my emails down there. If you want to be in touch, I'd love that.
Thanks. I want to harken back to Christopher's question about objective reality. And what do you do when someone says, well, that might be true, but that's not how I feel. And so they refuse to accept the objective reality because they don't like the way it makes them feel. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. So I think it's so important to just slow down, but prior to that, because we can think about this work in different contexts. Braver Angels, for example, has a great program on doing this work in families, recognizing that many of us have been torn apart in this way. And so if I'm thinking about my brother, Steve, who I love and adore, and who thinks about things very differently than me, votes differently than me, he and I have deep respect and appreciation. We can slow down and talk about, okay, what is the objective criteria we're going to use to make a decision on this? And that takes time, right? Because we have to talk about sources. Some of these issues are so complicated. I think I'm a fairly smart person. I can't begin to understand some of these research papers on epidemiology or other pieces that can tear us apart. And I don't think we have to understand all of those. I think it's important to admit that we don't know everything, that we don't understand what that article says, that we didn't read anything in the article other than the headline. And I think too often we try to get further than we just are capable of. And when we want to go further with that on those fact-based pieces, we have to slow down and identify who are we listening to? How do we know? How do we treat the veracity of that particular source? What is their expertise? Why do you think they're important? And to identify who we're going to treat as credible resources in reaching a conclusion.
You mentioned something briefly there that triggered a thought in my head, and that is we need to look beyond the headlines, because sometimes headlines, you know how we were told not to use key cites as citations in law school because the cite might not necessarily really say what the case says? A lot of times the headlines don't represent the actual information in the article, and failing to look beyond the headlines falls on us.
That's absolutely right. And it occurs in our, yes, and I'll just give you the example from that group of red and blue legislators in New Hampshire. They said, we can't assume that what we heard the other person said, they actually said, because they rely on media representations of what Lori said. And you then, Lori, hear what I was quoted as saying, which may or may not be what I said, or may have been taken out of context entirely. And so before jumping to a conclusion, assuming that somebody did say that, it is critical to confirm and to check in and go from there when that's possible.
Unpacking the discussion to the point you really are dealing with what we would like to call objective reality.
Yeah. And confirming that a fact is a fact, that the person actually did say something. It may be the case that they did not say that, or otherwise.
And Chris makes a good point.
Yes, headlines are composed to drive engagement. Yeah. We have to be mindful of conflict provocateurs. It's conflict entrepreneurs, right? That there is money, lots and lots of money to be made in our outrage. There just is. The algorithm is set up on some of these social media platforms to drive our outrage, not to expand on our similarities. So thanks for pointing that out.
Well, Jay, thank you very much. We are out of time. Are there any remaining questions anyone would like to ask in the last few seconds? I'll give you like a few seconds to type.
And as they're doing that, Lori, I'll just thank you again for making space for this conversation, this presentation at all, but also this week before the Media Literacy Week, right after Conflict Resolution Day. And thanks for the great work you're doing for law school.
Well, thank you. I mean, the timing was perfect. It just sometimes things just happen that way when you don't necessarily intend them to, but that's perfect. So thank you, Jay. Thank you to everyone that participated. You have my email address. You have Jay's email address. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Jay.
Thank you.